Hey everyone, welcome to the Canine Culture Podcast, where we talk about everything dog. Q&As with veterinarian professionals, rescue operators, everyday topics. We cover everything dog on this podcast. So make sure you subscribe to the Canine Culture Podcast on your favorite podcast platform, and make sure you're following us on social media on both Instagram and Facebook. Thanks again for listening. Now here's that next episode. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Canine Culture Podcast. This is your host, Brittany, and today we are joined by Jennifer Holland. She is a New York Times bestselling author and the author of Dog Smart. So thank you so much, Jennifer, for joining us today.
Thanks for having me on.
So we're going to talk a little bit about your book, Dog Smart, dog breed characteristics, dog breed intelligence related to those characteristics. But let's kind of get started with your background. Tell us a little bit about you and, how you kind of got into this world and into writing the book, Dog Smart.
I would say it all started in the womb. My mother was a huge dog lover, all animals really, and she kind of passed that on to me. So right from the get-go, it was all about animals for me. And writing. Writing was an early passion. My grandmother used to save all my short stories and poems, and she was very encouraging. And she even told me, someday you'll write for National Geographic. And ultimately, I was on staff at National Geographic for about 11 years, doing mostly natural history related writing, which was a wonderful gig. I got to travel and do a lot of really exciting stuff and be in nature with animals doing their thing in the wild. But then when I turned to books, I kind of came a little closer to home and got interested in domestic animals and animals on farms and the interesting relationships that they can have. So my Unlikely Friendship series kind of addressed these sweet kind of animal pairings that were a little bit unexpected. And ultimately, I think dogs are a big passion of mine. And I started thinking a little bit about intelligence and what it means to be intelligent if you're not a human. We sort of have a certain definition of that. And we kind of think of our dogs as maybe not so smart if they don't respond the way we expect them to, or if we're, training them and they're not doing what we ask. And I just wanted to sort of look at that and say, well, what is that? Is that really a fair way to define intelligence in another animal? And that got me really thinking about dogs and all the remarkable things that they do and how, they really have different kinds of intelligence. And if you look at those, you see just how incredibly intelligent they really are.
That's awesome. That kind of your journey, the way that it led you back into dogs. And I used to love writing. And before I did the podcast for, I think 3 or 4 years, I was like, well, I'm just going to blog, I'm just going to blog. And I realized that outlet was not a dying art, but a little bit more of a limited art than podcasts, especially since we're all so go, go, go.
Yeah.
It's much better to have things, that you can listen to. And so I kind of deviated from my love of writing. I get to write at work, but it is not the same. Legal writing, there's no room for fluff or for fun.
Right.
And so I don't get to enjoy any of that. So that's exciting that you kind of took those interests and ran with them.
Yeah.
So whenever you were at National Geographic, were you primarily writing pieces on different animals, or was it kind of mixed?
It was a mix, but it was kind of all related to that. So I might do a story, it was a lot of conservation and nature and environment mixed with sort of the wildlife aspect. So I might go to, somewhere to spend time with, a certain primate species, but then I also might go to a national park. Like I was in a national park in Borneo a couple of years ago and wrote about just the biodiversity in general of that place. And so it was kind of, a little bit broader than just wildlife, but kind of the world around wild things and how important that is.
Yeah, that's exciting. And so then you come back and you start Dog Smart. So what year did you start working on Dog Smart?
I think it was just about at the beginning of the pandemic. So terrible
Okay.
timing, really,
Yeah.
to try to do a book where I wanted to do field work. And it was basically, I would say it was a little after that, because it was 3 years of work, really. But I did, a lot of it was during the pandemic, and I was very fortunate because a lot of the people I wanted to spend time with their working dogs were incredibly generous about making it work despite the
Hmm.
situation. So I was able to really get around and do a lot of the field stuff that I wanted to do for the book to kind of bring dogs
Hmm.
to life and not just be about the academic side of dog intelligence.
Right. Right. So, what are some of the main themes of the book and some of the objectives of your book?
Yeah, so again, mainly the idea is let's think about what does it mean to be intelligent if your world is a little bit different from the human world. And we kind of forget, I think, that other animals experience the world in very different ways from us. And
Hmm.
we forget that, and we don't think about like the sensory experience of a dog is so different from ours. And in a way I see olfaction as their superpower. And I started
Hmm.
thinking about it as a kind of smarts, olfactory intelligence, because really it's one of the ways that they navigate, that they take in information. It's the main way, really. And they make decisions and problem solve and all of that in part based on smell. And so that's kind of a form of intelligence. And I thought about adaptive intelligence, the fact that dogs have adapted like really like no other animal on earth. They kind of have a
Hmm.
special niche. They're sort of 1 foot in nature and 1 foot, well, probably 3 feet really in our in our homes now.
Right.
But they've navigated the world differently from really any other animal, and they've genetically changed over time to
Hmm.
fill this niche with us and to have this relationship with us. And so I dig
Hmm.
a little bit into how that relationship came to be, what we know about it, and how the different kinds of intelligence that a dog has, how does that manifest in the relationship with humans and in the things that they do naturally.
Hmm. You touched on a few key points there with respect to intelligence in dogs, and one of those being that they get around the world with their nose, so to speak. They experience the world with their nose. That's how they have the majority of their interactions, or maybe interactions they avoid. Can you think of any other, I guess you could say, key takeaways with respect to intelligence and just kind of what you learned overall about dogs?
Yeah, another aspect of their intelligence that I spent a lot of time on was communication, communicative intelligence, and sort of social intelligence more broadly. And I
Hmm.
really, I thought I knew dogs fairly well. I felt that I could read them pretty well. I consider myself a bit of a dog whisperer. We all like to think of ourselves that way.
Right.
But I really got to know dog's language much better, and really mostly body language, but of course they also have vocalizations and others. But it's a really amazing, robust, detailed kind of language, and we're not very good at reading it. And I think that
Hmm.
affects our relationship with dogs a great deal, because we misread them, and we're our responses don't always make sense to them because we're not really thinking in a dog centric way. And so one of my takeaways was kind of to try to learn the language of the dog more, and to be more mindful of their experience in the world and in how we do things around them. Even things, small things like spraying perfume or
Hmm.
making loud noises. I mean, we know that some dogs are very sensitive to that kind of thing. But just to better understand sort of where they're coming from, and how we can adjust our behavior a little bit to sort of let them be dogs and not expect them to
Hmm.
be humans.
Right. I think a lot of our communication with dogs is flawed in our expectation or
Yeah.
perception. We see them, let's say, growl. We're like, oh, they're being bad.
Right.
Not necessarily. They might be warning us about something. They might be letting us know, hey, I'm uncomfortable with that.
Exactly.
And so I think that is some of the problems we have with communicating with dogs, is like putting our own expectations on them and then just categorizing these actions where, a bark in one dog is certainly different than a bark in another. They can mean
Absolutely.
something totally different.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes,
So,
yeah, sometimes the opposite of what you
yeah,
think. And so that's
yeah.
surprising in some ways too. Yeah.
Yeah. So if we were to dive into specific breeds, what breed of dog maybe that you learned the most about or surprised you the most?
I would say this is sort of an interesting aspect of the book for me, was that I went into it feeling that, okay, border collies and German shepherds, and, there are certain dogs that we think of as being very smart, and they are. Part
Mhm.
of that, I think, is that attentiveness and that desire to do well, and just that focus that some of these breeds have, and which is why we use them the way that we do, for the
Mhm.
kinds of tasks that they do. But one of the things I think I learned is that there isn't, I mean, while genetics is a big factor, and it certainly affects, there are trends within a breed, or certain things that they lean toward. It's often about opportunity too. And if you take a dog that you wouldn't expect to perhaps be a good sniffer, for example, and you give
Mhm.
them a sniffing task and you test them, there was some science done in this, and they showed, that, for example, pugs did better than German shepherds in certain olfaction detection tasks. And
Hmm.
it was, the personality of the dogs, it was the commitment and excitement and enthusiasm of the dog. But, to say that this breed or that breed is necessarily more intelligent, I sort of found that there's just different kinds, there's different ways to be
Mhm.
smart. And whichever breed you choose is going to have, it's going to be some genetics, but it's going to be environment, it's going to be that individual dog. So, I think a lot of different factors come together to determine that dog's trajectory.
Mhm. Were you able to see, like, let's say, 2 German Shepherds or 2 Border Collies and kind of compare them and see some of those differences between them based on those environmental factors?
Yeah, I would say, I did spend some time in different contexts with people who had
Mhm.
border collies. So I spent time with a shepherdess, observing that sort of remarkable dance that happened between her, this dog, and the sheep, trying to, wrangle all of that. And that was an amazing thing to watch, because I mean, I think those dogs that do that farm work are especially tuned in. And even when the dog was way out in the field, and, the shepherdess would sort of gesture, or she would speak very quietly, and the dog was like responding and was just so in tune with her. And it was really kind of a special kind of intelligence and relationship that I saw there. Which was just different from some of the, a border collie that I spent time with, that does sort of tricks, and,
Mhm.
is trained to do fun stuff. And it was a more playful relationship, and it was, certainly a committed dog, but it was just I didn't really see quite that same attention and that
Right.
focus in the dogs in that context. But very much you see the different personalities, and you're going to get, one border collie that's just not into it, and
Yeah.
six others that are, and so it just depends.
I think it's kinda like people, like, you remember growing up and they would say, "Oh, he's really tall, he'll be great at basketball.
Hmm.
That person has really long arms, they'll be great at swimming." And I think people think the same thing about dogs, like, "Well, I'll get a beagle, it'll be a great hunting dog."
Yeah.
That beagle might not have the drive, they might not have the nose, the
Yeah.
interest,
Yeah.
and so I do think as humans, we love to put anything in a category,
We do.
whatever it might be, and we do that with dogs, our working dogs, our sporting dogs,
Yeah.
and I do think now we're seeing more and more dogs being utilized in wider capacities across more breeds.
Yeah.
Um, to that respect, did anything surprise you, like any particular breed being used in any particular capacity? Did it surprise you to where you said, "Oh, I didn't even think that breed could do that"?
Hmm. Um, I wouldn't say there were any major surprises in that. I mean, I was impressed with, for example, I spent time at the Seeing Eye in New Jersey, and the variety of dogs that they had, at some of these seeing eye training facilities. They really, they're all capable, or, many of them are very capable of doing the kinds of things, if they're trained properly. It's really just about that training, and about,
Right.
understanding how that particular dog is learning and being able to respond and train appropriately. The military dogs I spent time with, again, there was kind of more of a mix a little bit than I expected. I sort
Mhm.
of expected it to be all, German Shepherds and Malinois, and there
Right, that's
were,
all you think about.
yeah,
Yeah.
and there were others mixed in there that were, just as fierce and amazing and committed as those breeds were. So, but you certainly do see the ones that you expect. I think there is
Mhm.
something to be said for that. There's a reason that we think of them that way because those dogs do lean in that direction and they tend to excel at those kinds of tasks.
Mhm.
Yeah.
If there's any specific breed that you could dig into for this podcast episode, any specific breed that stands out to you, that you can kind of think about their background, their intelligence, and their traits, is there anyone that comes to mind?
I write about, well, it's kind of a funny one. I have Korean Jindos, which are
Okay.
I think, an unusual breed in this
Yeah, you don't
country.
see those very
Don't see them too
often.
much, and probably for good reason. They're not. They're definitely not for everyone. They, they come from a single island in Korea, and they're absolutely beautiful. They're kind of that, quote unquote primitive type of dog. One of the Asian
Mhm.
breeds with the kind of fluffy tail and the pointy ears and a little wolfy looking, coyote looking.
Mhm.
And it's interesting because I grew up with golden retrievers and Weimaraners and, kind of more your loving gaze into your eyes breeds. And the
Right.
Jindos are just not like that. And it's interesting to think about where they come from and the fact that they've been less, um, their genetics have been less fiddled with. We haven't been
Mhm.
messing with them and changing them in the same way that we have with some of the other breeds that that we find, that we like the best. And it's been an experience to learn how they learn and to understand that they don't react the same way as other dogs and they don't like
Hmm.
the same things. And again, I'm overgeneralizing after I just said
Right, right.
not to generalize, but there, my one of them, he doesn't want to look me in the eye. It's
Hmm.
I'll have another dog that will, they kind of gaze at you and you gaze at them and you feel that warmth and that oxytocin boost, and he will look away. It's like
Uh-huh.
he's just not that kind of dog, and it's his world, and you're just sort of visiting the edge of it, and it's kind of all up to him. He's not warm with everybody. He's the prey drive is amazingly high with Jindos, and this
Okay.
particular Jindo, and so it's just been, I think, interesting to see how different he is from other dogs I've owned, and just completely, it's a completely different
Mhm.
experience as an owner to have a dog like that versus, one that wants to sit in your lap and lick your face. And
Right. Yeah.
so, yeah, that's been kind of an education for me. And he's in the book quite a bit. So,
Okay. A and I don't wanna phrase this question incorrectly, and you can just not answer it, but is there a dog that you could say, a dog breed that was the most intelligent? And I know that intelligence is a spectrum,
yeah,
and we can't sit here and say it, but we do as people, we say Einstein, intelligent,
right,
brilliant,
right,
genius.
right.
So with respect to a breed, is there one that just kept excelling at different tests or traits that you were looking at?
I think it would be hard to pick one because I sort of went to them looking for at the different kinds of intelligence. So,
Yeah.
I looked at emotional intelligence and it happened to be golden retrievers. It happened to be
Mhm.
some Great Danes that I went into the field, which was basically a nursing home, and observed how they managed around people and, unexpected gestures and petting and that sort of
Mhm.
thing, versus, again, the military dogs, there was a mix there, but it was mostly German Shepherds and Malinois, mostly Malinois.
Mhm.
And they have a certain kind of intelligence, or certain kinds of intelligence that they really exhibited more than others. But I think, I did see labs in a variety of circumstances. I saw them
Mhm.
as in search and rescue. I saw there were some in the military batches. They're certainly great seeing eye dogs, and can be. But it'd be tough to say that they're smarter than
Right, right.
a border collie or a German shepherd or some other breed. So it's a tough question for me, just because I sort of tried to get away from the idea that there is one breed that's smarter than others, even though
Yeah.
it certainly does. There are certain traits that do stand out in certain breeds.
Mhm. On the flip side, were there any dogs, and I know this one's even more rough.
The
I don't even
dumb
know if I should
dogs.
ask it. Yeah. Are there any that were lacking it sounds terrible, but any sort of, emotional intelligence or that working ability or just a dog that you were like, "Wow, that dog is just maybe meant to just lay at home
Right.
and be a couch potato." I
Yeah.
mean, was
Yeah.
there any dog that you found that fit that?
I mean, I've definitely met dogs like that. I For this book, I didn't, mainly because I was looking for
Right.
specifically, and I spent a lot of my time with trainers and handlers of different kinds of working dogs. So dogs that have had the most opportunity to show off all their kinds of intelligence,
Mhm.
and do hear things like, oh, Afghan hounds are stupid,
Yeah.
or, and if you're not thinking about, more broadly about intelligence, you look at your dog licking a bottom of a shoe or staring at a wall, and you kind of think, not sure there's a whole
Yeah.
lot going on in there.
Right.
And I'm sure, I think there are individual dogs certainly out there. But again, I wouldn't necessarily pick a breed and say, that I just don't know. I haven't been around enough
Yeah.
Afghan hounds to say for sure.
Right.
So,
We won't label any of them.
yeah.
We're not gonna give labels.
But, there's
And just
certainly, when they're breeding them for beauty, or that, if we're breeding
yeah.
them for particular traits that don't have to do with cognition, then I think you're going to lose a little bit of that. And that might be where some of that comes in.
Yeah, and I could add commentary here, but I won't. It might, offend quite a few people, so we'll
Oh,
just
come
leave that
on.
out completely. So let's think about practical applications. So let's say I wanna get a dog. Maybe I buy Dog Smart and I look at it. Do you think that Dog Smart can help people pick a breed based on their wants, their needs, their lifestyle? Do you think people could use it kind of as like a guidebook?
I think it can help. Um, I think it might be more useful in helping people to think a little differently about their relationship with that dog, and, as you mentioned, your expectations of that dog.
Right. Okay.
And just thinking about, what are the dog's needs, what is the dog's experience, and how can I make sure that, I'm letting the dog be a dog as much as possible. So we kind of take things away by bringing dogs into our homes. We give them a lot. There's nothing wrong with that.
Mhm. Right.
But we take away, their ability to go roll in the mud and to hump each other and to play really roughly, and, some of the stuff that we say no to. And part of what the book is about is, what are some ways that we can give back to them, to let them have that in
Mhm.
times when it's appropriate and okay. You can't do that all
Right.
the time. But I try to give some practical advice, I guess, or some thoughts on things that you could do. Letting your dog sniff when you're out. Don't be in such a rush. Give them the
Right.
opportunity to use the tools that they have. Letting them make choices is something that
Mhm.
scientists, I talked to them and they said it's really important, even if it's something small like go right or go left on the walk.
Mm.
I've been more mindful of just letting my dog choose, which way do you want to go? Which treat do you want?
Mhm.
So there's small things like that, but I think it can just kind of make people think a little bit differently. I think about what to expect, and maybe how to treat their dog in a way that's more dog centric.
Yeah, I can see that. I can see how, going on a walk, you just kind of go through the motions and you kind of drag your dog along. Come on, let's go, quit
Yeah,
sniffing.
you're in a rush.
And you just go down your route and you don't really think about the dog has a different idea and perception behind that walk than what you do. For
Yeah,
you,
yeah,
either you're working out, they're working out, or both. And for them, they are engaging with a new environment.
yeah,
They are being exposed to new elements. And so they're viewing that walk so different from how we view it. So that
yeah.
does make a lot of sense.
Yeah, yeah. And it's a small thing, but you don't think about it. And then once you do think about it, I think about it a lot now, and
Right.
I'm, just watching my dogs a little more closely, trying to read them a little bit better, trying to, not be so quick to expect something of them that, that maybe they aren't ready to give. I try,
Mhm.
we're primates. We act differently than canines do. We do things that, canines don't hug, for
Right.
example. And so, the idea that we rush out and want to hug a dog and pet them, and we forget that to them could mean, all kinds of things. If you don't know the
Yeah.
dog, it can seem aggressive, even some of these behaviors. And so I try to remember that I'm a completely different species from this animal. And, and I need to think about what is it that makes sense for them rather than just for
Mhm.
me.
Yeah. Yeah, you see people all the time trying to give their dog a hug, and the dog is struggling, and, I mean, that's something that we truly don't think about. We're like, "Oh, I'm just giving you a hug." The dog has no idea what a hug
Yeah. Yeah.
is.
Right. Right.
Same thing with, like, petting on the top of the
Right.
head.
Right.
A
Like,
lot of
what's
dogs don't
that?
like that approach, and they
Hmm.
can't see you. Their vision is not seeing it,
Yeah.
and so people will assume like, "Oh, they're scared or they're aggressive," and it's like, "Well, no, they just didn't like you just coming in and just blindly touching the top of their
Yeah.
head."
Yeah. One of my
Yeah, so
sources, Dr. Stanley Coren, he likes to say this. I've heard him say it in a couple contexts, but he says it's amazing our dogs don't eat our children, because kids just do all the wrong things. They run up,
yeah,
they're screaming and shrieking, they reach their hands out over the dog's head, they hug, they pull the tail, all the things that don't make any sense at all to a canine. And that
yeah,
they, we're so fortunate that dogs are as tolerant as they are of us. And I think that's really one of the reasons they fill this niche that they fill.
mhm,
They have managed to tolerate humans to the point where they can take advantage of us and we
right,
take care of them. And, even though the vast majority of them are actually dogs on the streets, not the ones that live in our homes, but the ones
yeah,
that we do take care of at home, they, they've done a really smart thing by befriending humans, I think.
yeah, yeah. So if people want to pick up a copy of your book, where can they find the book and where can they find you?
They can find me at jenniferhollandwriter.com. There are links to the book there. You can also get it Amazon, B&N, barnesandnoble.com. Hopefully some of the brick and mortar, if you have one in your neighborhood, I would always encourage people to go there. And if they don't have it, tell them to order it, because I'd love to have it in all the stores. But I hope people will love it. I've had a really lovely reaction so far from people who've read it. So I hope that will continue.
Yeah, well, we appreciate you being on the podcast. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for tuning in to the Canine Culture Podcast. Please make sure you subscribe to the Canine Culture Podcast on your favorite podcast platform, and make sure you're following us on social media. If you have any recommendations, any topics that you'd like to hear, if you know of any guests that would be good for the show, or if you yourself want to be a guest, please reach out to us. Send us an email at canineculturepodcast@gmail.com, or send us a direct message on social media. Thank you for listening, and please share this with any of your dog-loving friends.